Hello guys, so today I want to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to go through how to make a game. This game is made using Scratch, and it resembles a game that I used to play years ago at school. It was a little flash-based game where you control a fish and you move it around, and as you collect food or eat other fish, you grow in size, and if anything came along that was bigger than you, it ate you. I have made it using Scratch, so I'm going to go over to Scratch and you can have a look around. So for those of you who don't know what Scratch is, it is a really simple coding environment. It's aimed at young children or people just getting into coding who don't know what coding is or how it works. It is organised in blocks or block types. So you'll see here that there's lots of these different types of block, and they connect together a bit like jigsaw pieces or Lego pieces. And you've got various categories of blocks as well. So for example, you've got motion blocks, and these are responsible for the movement of a character or an object. You've got looks, these are responsible for changing how an object or a background looks or displaying messages. You've got sounds, quite self-explanatory, they play sounds. You can play little audio loops, you can change the volume of things, change the tempo. You've got a pen tool, which means that you can create a drawing program, so if you wanted to be able to draw shapes you can. You've got event blocks. What these blocks do is they can control when something starts or when something happens. You've got control blocks, and these are quite possibly some of the most important ones. These are the foundation for Boolean logic and really simple programming. So for example, you've got an if loop here. What that in simplified terms basically does is if something happens, something else then happens. You can tell it, so for example I've got it here so that if I press the up arrow key, then point in direction 0. Moving on to the next one, you've got sensing. So we've got our key pressed button, one there, or key pressed block. You can then have it so if it touches the mouse pointer or touches a specific colour. You've then got operators, so these are kind of an expansion upon Boolean logic. So you can use these to enable randomness or additions and things like that. So for example, under my sprites or characters, I've used an operator to define the location of them, or if the score, if the game reaches a certain value, then carry out an action. A couple of kind of more tricky ones, so you've got data. So I've made a variable. So what that in essence does is it creates a custom thing that you can measure against or use to measure. So for example, I've got a variable called score, so that's the score you gain as you collect things, and I've used that. So for example, if score equals 10, then show. So I'm going to go through each sprite and explain the blocks within that sprite, and I'm going to briefly play the game and show that. So sprite 1, which is a thing that you've got to collect or get to increase your score. So when I press the green flag at the top, which starts the game, I'm saying show sprite 1, and then I've got a forever loop, which means that if something is within that forever loop, it will carry on and on until I say stop. So I'm saying for forever, if a sprite is touching shark, which is another sprite, then hide the sprite, wait 1 second, then move the sprite to a random X coordinate and a random Y coordinate, and then show. Once that is done, loop. Then my second sprite, which is a shark, which is your controllable character. When you start the game, set your score to 0, set his size to 10% of its normal size, and always be moving. Now, that's crucial to the kind of gameplay, as it were, but there are some parameters. So, for example, when you press the green flag as well, in our rather large forever loop, we've got some movement controls here. So we've got if up arrow is pressed, pointing direction 0, and in this context 0 is up. If left arrow is pressed, pointing direction -90, which is left. If down arrow is pressed, pointing direction 180, which is down. Or if the right arrow is pressed, pointing direction 90, which is right. So that allows us to move our sprite left, right, up and down to get to the first sprite. Now, what we want to do as well is kind of give some feedback to the player when they've collected a sprite. So I've said if our shark sprite is touching the first sprite, change the score by 1, so increase the score, and also change his size by 1. So that will change his size, so the more you collect, the bigger your sprite or your character gets, which then makes it trickier with the gameplay later on. So I've got some other if loops here. So if touching, and then you can set it to if you're touching, so I've selected octopus, and if he touches octopus 1, then set the score to 0 and set the size to 10%. So that basically means reset his size, reset the score, and I've done that for each octopus sprite which will appear. Then I've got one down here that is if he touches the edge, bounce. So that bounces the sprite off of the edge and in the opposite direction. Now I've got some blocks here which are to do the sounds or background music, but I haven't connected them just as it's quite loud. But what these ones do is, so when you press the green flag, play sound until done, and then as it's in a forever loop, it just carries on doing that till it's done, so it creates a looping background music. So we're going to move on to the next sprite, which is octopus. I've got 4 of these, but each one, the code within them is the same. So for these, when you press the green flag, set the size to 25%, and in a forever loop we've got repeat until score equals 1, then glide 5 seconds to X, and then pick random coordinate, y is a pick random coordinate, and then wait 1 second, and then that repeats and repeats until it gets to the next repeat until, where the score is 10. So on numbers 1 through 9 it will use these values, and then from 10 to 11 it will use these values. But I've set it to appear at a certain point, which is where this block on the right hand side comes in. So when the green flag is clicked within this forever loop, I've got two if loops, and if the score equals 10 then show this octopus, and if score equals 0 then hide him. And if you remember, the shark sprite has the bit of code in whereby if he touches any of the octopus or octopi then the score will reset to 0. So as soon as the score resets to 0, the octopus sprite will disappear. Now, to add a element of difficulty, what I've done is, so at the start where your score is low, the glide time for movement is longer. So if I was having him move from the top left to the bottom right, it would take 5 seconds for him to get there. As it gets harder and harder and your score goes up, the glide time reduces. So glide 1 second will mean that it'll only take 1 second to get to a location. So as you progress and as your score gets higher, your fish gets bigger, or your shark gets bigger, and the octopus sprites get faster at getting to their location. So all in all, it becomes more difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly play through and show you the basics of it. So I'm going to hit the green flag, and my shark is there. A bit difficult to make out at times. So you can hear the pop when I hit the sprite, just as a bit of feedback to the player. So we're coming up to our score equaling 10. Just one more, and as you can see, an octopus has appeared. It's moving quite slowly, but that's the kind of aim at this level of it. But as our score gets higher, it will become more difficult. So our score at 15, we've got another octopus that's appeared, and as you can tell by now, our shark has grown in size. So 20. So I won't go for that one just yet, let him move out of the way. And then on 25, got another one that appears. So all in all, it's a very simple game. I'm just going to quickly show you as well. So the bounce that I was talking about earlier, so if I go left, hits the wall, bounces off, hits another wall, bounces off, hits another wall, bounces off. I'll show you as well what happens when you do touch an octopus. So my score has reset to 0 and my shark has shrunk. So that's a really simple game that I've made using Scratch. Didn't take too long to make, maybe about an hour all in all, just to work out some of the behavioural stuff and get it working the way I wanted to. But with Scratch You can make all sorts of games. You can do platformers similar to Mario and things like that. You can do block breaking games, and really there's no limit on your imagination. Well, there is, in that you can't necessarily do hugely complicated 3D graphics and things like that, but you can get the fundamentals of coding under your belt, and you can understand how code goes together, how it doesn't go together as well, which is quite important. I think understanding how if loops and forever loops work within each other is quite important, and the ordering of things. But all in all, not a hugely complicated program, but shows the fundamentals of putting a game together, which I think is quite important. And Scratch is a program as well that is being pushed within schools at the moment a lot, as a lot of schools in the UK are expanding their curriculum to include STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and that will involve a lot of programming and coding, much more information about how to behave online and how to look after your data and things like that, really. But yeah, I'm not going to go on for any longer. Hopefully it's been interesting to see Scratch and what you can do with it, and hopefully you've learnt something and been inspired to go and make something yourself, whether it's a recreation of a game or something completely original. Scratch will enable you to get the foundation and the basics to be able to code that game. So cheers guys, hope you enjoyed it. If so, give it a thumbs up, maybe sub, and have a good day.